Hey guys, what is up? Welcome to this review here on the Budding Watch Enthusiast. Today, we are checking out a prototype of a watch that's actually currently on Kickstarter. And if you are watching this review when I post it up, there's not too much time left on this watch. So today we're looking here at the Merlin Sea Legend. This is the inaugural watch from Merlin Watches. They're a new company based in Singapore, and the Sea Legend, of course, is their first offering. As you can see at first glance, a very deliberately retro-styled diver. Seems to be seeing a lot of those these days. I don't know, for some reason that seems to me to be kind of like the 2019 indie brand trend that I picked up on so far. But we're going to check out this one here from Merlin. Now, there's a couple caveats with this prototype that I have to mention that are going to pretty significantly change in the final production model, assuming that, they make their funding on Kickstarter. So the first thing here, the bezel, you can see on this watch, it is a fixed bezel. The final version is going to have a 120 click unidirectional rotatable bezel, as you'd expect on a dive watch. Also, the alignment issues that are very obvious, as you can see, the triangle at 12 not aligned correctly. Really, the entire bezel is just not aligned correctly. Those will obviously be corrected on the production model as well. The crown here is not a screw-down crown. The final production model will have a screw-down crown. The finishing, when we get to the hands and the indices, you will see has a brushed finished or very flat finished. They're going to be polished on the production model. The branding on the buckle here and on the bracelet, the optional bracelet, is upside down. That'll, of course, be fixed. The beads on the bracelet will be a little bit more protruding. And again, we'll talk about the bracelet in a little bit. And the water resistance is listed as 300 meters on the back. It's going to be lowered to 200 meters for the final model. So again, keep those in mind as we're walking through the review of this watch. So let's start with the case. Of course, 316L stainless steel here, a satin finish on most of the case. You do have a nice beveled edge running down either side of the case, and you also see it here on the bottom of the case as well. So a little bit of a nice visual flare. You guys can see it running along the side there. The kind of oversized crown is appropriate for a retro styled watch. It does have this stamped star logo on it. I'm not sure if that's a Merlin logo or something for the Sea Legend specifically. If we flip it over, the screw-down display case back shows off the Salida 200 movement that's powering this watch, and you can see that the Golden Boy variant that I'm holding in my hand does have a rose gold custom rotor. On the other models, the rotor is just going to be a stainless steel rotor, but with the same Merlin branding on it. And the watch is topped off with a pretty tall box sapphire crystal that is anti-reflective coated. The proportions are actually pretty restrained on this watch. It's only a 39 millimeter width. The lug length is only 46 millimeters. The height's definitely the biggest outlier, 13.5 millimeters there. And of course, the strap width is 20 millimeters. And because you have that really tall crystal and also, a tall bezel as well, if the bezel stays the same height, even when they go to the rotatable bezel, it is going to wear a little bit taller. I mean, even with this taller bezel, that crystal still sticks up a solid 2 millimeters above that. So it's going to add a lot of extra height to the wrist in a watch that is proportionally a little bit more restrained. Now, if we look at the dial, this is actually a black gilt dial. And again, this is the Golden Boy variant. There's about 5 different versions of the Sea Legend that are going to be available during the Kickstarter. But the dial here is black gilt. The center disc on the dial is actually black enamel. And then you can see on the outside of the watch, it's a little hard to see because of the crystal, but there is an open minute track that is painted gold. Now, the middle dial, I'll try to show it to you here. The middle dial and the minute track are actually a bit recessed compared to the main dial as well. That's something that I'm always a huge fan of. Of course, that center disc does have the Merlin Sea Legend branding, and it also has the automatic branding there at the bottom, which is something that you saw quite often on watches of this time period. Now, of course, applied to the dial here, you see these triangular indices that go all the way around. The ones at the cardinal positions are a little bit larger, and they do have the hour numerals printed on them as well. Now, for the bezel, they're calling it a Bakelite sapphire bezel. Obviously, this is not a Bakelite bezel. It's using traditional superluminova that you find on watches today. But what they're going for is they're trying to mimic the style of the Bakelite bezels that were much more prevalent in the 1960s. Of course, you see gold numerals marking the 10-minute marks, along with hashes at the 5s, and the red triangle topping it off there at 12 o'clock. For the hands, they've gone with syringe-style hands, slightly thicker hour hand than minute hand to help with legibility. And if you do have a syringe-style arrow-tipped second hand running around the watch as well. And again, on the final production model, all the indices and hands are going to be polished steel as opposed to the brushed finish that you see here right now. And of course, the bezel, the indices, and the hands are all filled with C3 Super Luminova. So I think Merlin does pull off a very unique take here on this specific style of diver. Obviously, it's most popularly associated with the Zodiac Seawolf, but there's lots of watches in the 1960s that used this style of dial as far as the triangular indices go. Now, my favorite part of the dial is the multi-layering, the different heights on there. Having a multi-layered dial, having different depths on the dial is one of my favorite techniques that not too many watchmakers use, as I think that that's a great way to make the dial still very clean, but really still add some visual complexity, some things to draw your eye in while you're looking at the watch. Now, I think that the big miss for me here is using triangular indices all the way around, or if they're going to do it, I think they should have made the cardinal markers a little bit larger, because if you'd done that, you could have either eliminated the numerals that are on them, or you would have given them a little bit more room to have maybe a bolder font, because the font, as they kind of sit right now in the Sea Legend, it almost kind of seems like an afterthought. The font on the markers doesn't feel consistent with the aesthetic that the rest of the watch is pulling off. So I'd like to either see those done in a different way or just not have them at all. And again, enlarge those 12, 3, 6, and 9 indices a little bit. And really, it's hard to really gauge the dial as a whole for the final model because, again, switching the finishing on the hardware that's inside the dial to a polished finish is going to have a pretty dramatic effect on the watch. I mean, we can imagine what that looks like, but I would like to see it in person to really gauge, how that dial is going to look, because I think that might actually help the whole thing come together. So we talked about the movement inside being the Sellita SW200. That means you're getting a 38-hour power reserve, you're getting 28,800 vibrations per hour, you're getting hacking, and you're getting hand wind. Now, the prototype model here does have a ghost position for the date, as the Sellita SW200 traditionally has a date associated with it. Of course, this watch does not. I don't know if that's still going to be there on the final production model as well. So the strap that you get on the Merlin Sea Legend by default is this black sailcloth strap that you see here with signed hardware. Now, you see a couple strap options over here. We're going to show you real quick. Either of these straps or both can be added for $80 a piece in the Kickstarter campaign. First, here you have the Merlin Beads of Rice bracelet that you can get on the watch that does have this very small deployant buckle on it. Or you can also opt for this custom-made Italian leather strap. Now, I'm usually a pretty big fan of getting a bracelet when that's an option that's available, but I actually, in this case, prefer the sailcloth strap to the bracelet. The Grand Seiko-esque buckle on this is a little bit of a nice change of pace compared to what we normally see from most bracelets from independent brands. But the lack of a micro adjustment is always going to be a huge turnoff for me. The links do appear a tad smaller than your average bracelet link, so maybe getting a good fit might be easier. And the other thing that I'm not a huge fan of with this bracelet is that the polished links, they're a little flat, and again, that's being addressed in the final production model. Like I mentioned earlier, they're going to be a little bit more rounded, but they're also not quite as brilliant as I usually like to see on a Beads of Rice bracelet. I really like that heavy contrast between the brushed and polished links. And I don't know, for whatever reason, the ones on this bracelet just seem a little bit dull. Now, that said, the sailcloth strap's actually a really nice option anyway. Pairs well with any of the different colorways that you get of this watch. The leather backing on the sailcloth is actually really tactile and very grippy, but it still is very soft on the wrist and is super comfortable when you're wearing it. And speaking of wearing it, here's what the Merlin Sea Legend looks like on my 8-inch wrist. Now, this might be one where the larger wristed among us might have a little bit of trouble. It's not even the 39 millimeter width that makes it not look as comfortable. It's more that 46 millimeter lug to lug distance being a little shorter. You guys can see it's a little short on my wrist as far as wrapping around. It's very comfortable. I mentioned the height is going to be definitely the biggest sticking point here with this one. It's going to stick up a little far for a lot of people's tastes. But again, it's a very comfortable wear. The strap, again, the sailcloth strap, I really do like quite a bit. So as far as pricing goes, again, there's 5 different colorways available on the Merlin Kickstarter for the Sea Legend. This is the Golden Boy variant that I have in my hand here. As of this recording, when I'm making this video, there's still plenty of early bird Kickstarter pledges available, which means that you can get this watch for as little as $349, though it is worth noting that the Meteorite version and the Dark Wizard version, which is a black PVD case on a black dial, do cost $100 more than the standard models. If you're watching this video on the day that I release it, just note that there are only a couple, and I mean like 2 or 3 days left in the Kickstarter for the Merlin Sea Legend. There'll be a link in the description down below if you wanted to check it out. And the watch hasn't quite made its goal yet. So if you are interested in this watch, I would recommend backing as quick as you can, because there's not a whole lot of time left on it. So what I have in hand here with the Merlin Sea Legend, it's a very solid prototype, and it seems like it's going to be a great option if you are partial to this kind of Seawolf-esque style of vintage diver, because it's coming in at an affordable price point without the risk of actually having to buy a vintage watch and all of the, possible downfalls that entails. And I also have to note that getting a watch with a Sellita movement for under $400 is a really good value. That is completely undisputed. But that being said, it's really hard to render a real verdict on this one. I've reviewed prototype models before, like I've reviewed, review samples that get sent out before production actually happens. I've never reviewed one where there's going to be quite as many drastic changes to the watch as there's going to be from the Sea Legend. And so for me, it's kind of hard to pass a true verdict on the watch, because what the watch is going to be, if it's successfully funded, is quite different than the watch that I'm holding here in my hand. I mean, the dial, which is, the feature that you're going to see the most, is not even going to look the same, because switching from a brushed to a polished finished is going to be very significant. And that's, water resistance, that's whatever, the crown being screwed down doesn't change the visual appearance of the watch, but, that dial and bezel are definitely going to change things up a little bit. Now, I do hope the Kickstarter is successful, because again, I think the watch is going to be a solid watch. I think the final product could be somewhat of a hidden gem if they are able to pull it off. And I do hope that if the Kickstarter falls short, that they do tweak some of the messaging in the pledge levels in the campaign and they give another shot. Making simpler pledge levels might get them a little bit further along the line. And I definitely think that there's a market for this watch. So definitely go check out the Kickstarter for the Merlin Sea Legend. If you're watching this when I put it out, again, description down below. And if it does not happen to make the goal this time around, keep an eye out for this watch. I hope it does get relaunched. And if it does, I do hope that we're able to check out the kind of final model of the watch, because I would really like to see what that looks like when it's all said and done. So folks, that does it for this review of the Merlin Sea Legend. If you guys liked the video, hit the thumb down below. If you loved it, click the red subscribe button and ring the bell icon. Thank you guys very much for watching this, and I will see you all the next time.